Hello, my friends. Welcome. This is the Back to Me podcast. And today I'm talking to Annie McDonnell, and we are talking about transitions. And we're talking about grief, but not necessarily in just the passing of loved ones, but transitions of any kind have some kind of grief. And we're talking about the emotions involved in that and why it's okay to feel those things. Take care. Have a listen. Let me know what you think. I'll talk to you soon. Hi, my friends. Welcome. This is the Back to Me podcast, and this is Heather, and I am super excited that you're here. You are going to hear some tips and some tricks and some ideas to help you live your happiest and healthiest self. I call it Back to Me because when you are taking care of yourself, back to me, then you can take better care of others, and we can all make the world a better place. This is Wellness Your Way, and I am super happy that you're here. Hello, my friend. How are you? I hope you're doing well and you're having a fabulous week. This is Heather. This is the Back to Me podcast. This is the awesome human celebrity edition of the podcast. And today's awesome human is Annie McDonnell. And we are going to talk all about managing life's transitions. Oh my gosh, and there's so many life transitions, aren't there?
Yep.
Hello, Annie. Thank you. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
Yes, absolutely. So, first of all, I would ask you because life transitions is pretty broad. So I guess we could let people know what exactly you do in that kind of realm or in,
Sure.
yeah.
Well, in my own personal experience with some life transitions, I still am a children's book editor. But in my 40s, after doing that for a long time, I had been kind of longing to do something else and explore different sides of myself for a while. Took a really, really long time to make the leap to go back to school to become an acupuncturist. So I had a very long transition period of 3 years of going to school full time and working full time in publishing. And since then, I still do some work in publishing, and I am growing my acupuncture business. So I'm an acupuncturist, and I do sound healing practices as well. And I, from more life transitions, for the past several years, I've lost several family members who are very dear to me. So I've gone back for some extra training in grief work. So
Right.
now I incorporate the course I took was called Grief Educator, which I think sounds a little formal and awkward.
Sounds kind of scary, actually.
Yes, no one wants to be educated in grief, really. So I call myself a grief guide just because grief is kind of a wilderness, and if it helps if you walk the territory with someone who's kind of explored some of the area. So that's a nutshell of what I do and some of the transitions I like to work with.
And it's interesting that so many people that I've been talking to have started in kind of that traditional role of the corporate type job, and you were in publishing, and I've talked to people in marketing, and I mean, I used to be in finance, and we've all hit this point where we think, wow, I think there's something else.
Mm-hmm.
And was there something that happened that made you decide? Like, was there a specific thing or just a slow build or?
It was a series of things that kept nudging me, nudging me, nudging me. I'd say that probably the first and maybe like the foundational moment was the first cat I'm a big animal lover, and the first cat I had on my own as an adult, unfortunately came down with cancer at a very young age, and so in trying to give her the best outcome possible, I learned to do some hospice care so I could keep her comfortable at home. And it was a very emotionally grueling period, but I also found it so deeply satisfying to have that bond with her and to be with someone I love through very difficult time. And I had, when I was in high school, I had thought like, oh, maybe I could be a pediatrician or do something to help people. But I am not the biggest fan of Western medicine as in
Right.
its current incarnation. It just didn't fit with my mindset as much. So I didn't have the confidence in myself in terms of I knew I could do the book learning side of it, but I'm a very emotional person, so I thought, oh, I'm a pediatrician and I work with dying children. It'll be too much for me to handle, and so I just kind of tabled that years and years before. But I guess there was a seed of it in my personality that I did want to be helping people in some way directly. So so anyway, in that experience, I was doing hands-on work with my cat, and my veterinarian was very, very sweet because he encouraged me and he said, like I have um, other patients whose owners are nurses who won't do what you're doing with your cat because cats are, it's harder to give injections to cats than to people.
It's
But
harder even to give them vitamins. I
yeah,
mean,
right.
they have a
Yeah,
lot to say.
luckily, my cat and I, she was the sweetest thing. She would even come to me when she knew I was going to give her horrible medicines because we just had a very strong bond. But so anyway, my vet encouraged me, and it just kind of lit a small flame inside me that like, oh, actually, I can handle more than I think I can.
Right.
And it was really emotionally satisfying, and it just like tapped into resources that I hadn't been connected to before. um, but it's a big leap to go from taking care of a sick cat to changing your whole life path. So
Maybe not that big a leap.
yeah, it's true. But I was very much in the mindset of you know I think I want more, but I don't know what the next step is. I can't figure out where this will lead and what to do next. And so I just it literally was like almost about a decade where different things happened, where I had acupuncture myself after 9/11 and found it very powerful. Um, and I just started exploring things that interested me without so much an agenda that like, oh, this is going to be my new career. I just was like, well, let me try this weekend class or do this. And so I had taken a months long Western herbalism class because I
Oh,
always
cool.
loved natural healing. And it was just like a good hands on class to like learn how to make some remedies yourself and look at the different systems of the body and how herbs can help the function. And interestingly enough, in that class, we had a guest teacher a few times who came from the Chinese tradition, the traditional Chinese medicine, because one of the beauties of Chinese medicine is that it really is an unbroken tradition that's thousands of years old. And in the West, all cultures around the world have been using herbs since time began. It's just the most instinctual thing. But in the West, because of the trajectory of witch trials
Oh my
and
gosh. Yeah.
and just like the fight between rationalists, the Enlightenment, and just the way things unfolded in the West, unfortunately, we're not as connected to our herbal medicine roots. So so I was exposed more in depth to the way of working with the body through the Chinese medicine system, and it really interested me. And in studying further in that path too, I realized that actually it sounds so odd, but acupuncture is safer than herbal medicine.
Wow.
You think needles, and people think like, oh my gosh, it's like so intense. But actually, acupuncture is very, very safe, very low risk of side effects, very effective. very gentle medicine. And with herbal medicine, it's very effective, but it can get very tricky and dangerous because of all the drug interactions. And you think of how many prescription drugs
Right.
people commonly take, and you know how much people weigh, and what dietary allergies and
Mm-hmm.
sensitivity. So herbal medicine is uh, very tricky, and there's also there issues of people want to drink bad tasting tea.
Yeah.
um, so it's maybe not the quickest way, the quickest path to healing for most people. um, so once I you never know where the path will lead. But more and more science kept pointing me like, oh, why don't you like look some more into acupuncture? Like I knew I could work hands on with needles because I had worked with my cat, and I knew I found it interesting. And the more I learned about it, it's just this beautiful medicine that you can study for your entire life and still go deeper and deeper and learn more about humans and how we're connected to nature and how everything's interacting within the body. And so that's the condensed version of, I guess, like the final clincher was, I did hit my 40s, and my parents started having health crises,
Right.
and it just hit home in a new way that, like, wait a minute, the time's time's going by fast, and do you really want to get another year or two older and think like, well, I could have tried that, but I didn't because I was too timid, or I didn't want to take the risk. So I think that was like my cat was like the initial uh, pivotal moment. And then, after 10 years of kind of, well, I don't know, and how will I afford school, and how will I have the time, how will I have the energy, how will I make it work? I realized that, like, you don't have to have everything figured out in a perfect 5-year plan, because that's not the way life works. um,
Even when you have a perfect 5 year plan, it's not going to work out that way.
exactly, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And a couple of things came to my mind. Have you read Big Magic?
Yes, I love this
Yes.
book. I read
Yeah.
it a few years ago, so it's not fresh in my mind.
Right. You
I
just,
Yeah.
I have it on audiobook and I've listened to it probably 3 or 4 times.
Mm,
And for listeners who don't know what book that is, it's by Elizabeth Gilbert. And because I just remember a story she told, and you did exactly the same thing. Is like, she didn't have another thing in her mind. She didn't know what she wanted to do, so she just followed her curiosity,
mm, yeah.
and she actually started gardening. And then it kind of expanded into, like, as she gardened and she got curious about things, it kept expanding and
Mm,
expanding, and she just did that, like, just follow the breadcrumbs of
mhm,
curiosity. And it, like, you can say, we could even go back, to as a young person, you knew you wanted to help people, and you just follow those breadcrumbs. Your cat was probably
mhm.
there to say, hey, it's time.
Yeah,
I'll help you through the transition to accepting that you can do it,
exactly.
right?
And connected to that too, there's a great, you know, oh no, Joseph Campbell.
Mm,
The He was an expert in mythology, and there's a beautiful PBS series with him from probably 30 years ago or more. Um, but a quote from him always sticks out in my mind. It's along the lines of, when you're brave enough to follow your bliss, the universe will open doors to you that wouldn't open to anyone else.
right.
And it's such a leap of faith, especially in like Western society that's very logical and
5 year
rational.
plan, people.
Right? And like, how will you make a living doing this? Or, but yeah, I found that, like, the hardest step was the first step, was just enrolling in acupuncture school, and then after that, things did start to fall into place. Just if I didn't worry, it's hard not to worry.
I know.
Come from a worrying family. Um, but if you can just kind of trust that one step at a time, things will unfold and it
Well,
will
and
be okay.
one of the things I think that people struggle with the most in that is you can have this great idea and you can know that you can feel like it's the right thing, but because you can't see how or all of the steps,
Right.
you don't. But
Yep.
that's not your job to know all those
Right.
steps, right?
Right.
You're
And
right, it
actually,
is that first step.
yeah. And you probably wouldn't even want to know. Or if someone told you, like if a psychic told you, you wouldn't even believe it because you'd be, because actually, like one of the things that happened to me was, so I mentioned that I was going to school full time and working full time, and I was at a publisher. I was with this publisher for 18 years, and I had a boss who was uh, really difficult, and
That's very kind.
yeah, difficult was challenging, um, and it was a very, publishing is very deadline oriented. So it's a very high pressure, deadline oriented job. Um, so what I did was, like, the agreement I made with myself was, you're not going to tell anyone you're doing this. It's just an experiment. It's okay if this doesn't work after a semester. Just go for one semester so you can know that you tried, but no one else has to know that you tried and failed, or had this big
Yeah.
thing that didn't work out or whatever. So I told my immediate family and a couple close friends, but other than that, I kept it secret for more than a year. And I just the school was weekends and evenings, and then I used vacation time when I needed to kind of go to the school clinic and treat patients, or I just made it work, when which ended up being kind of like oddly exhilarating too when you're keeping a big secret.
Right.
So anyway, but that was kind of, like, I didn't think it was sustainable to like keep it a secret for the full 3 years of school, and just like, with that level of my job was just like so stressful that, I was already on the edge of burnout before I even started school. But what ended up happening is after, I did the first semester, and even in that, right before I started, my dad had a major health crisis, where it was like another pivot point where I thought, like, well, maybe I haven't started, maybe I shouldn't do this, because I should go, be ready to spend as much time with my parents as they need. And, my dad at the time told me, like, no, no, we have the health care we need. We'll see you when you have time. Like, don't, don't hold yourself back on my account. But so I made it through the first semester and loved it. And made it through the second semester, loved it even more. Um, and then I guess it was about a year that went by, and I get a call out of nowhere from someone at a different publisher who I had been doing freelance work for about 15 years. And he, out of the blue, said, "Hey, would you be interested in leaving your company and coming over? I have an opening here." And so I went in to talk to him, and we were friendly enough that, I was like, I'm just going to lay it all out on the table. This is what I'm doing. I'm in school. So, um, I may need some flexibility in terms of vacation time, or just, and I can't promise you that I'll stay here long term, but I will, I have at least 2 more years of school, and it'll take me time to, get up and running after that. But I just want to tell you, I'm not going to be like, this isn't going to be my great, career for the next 20 years or whatever.
Right.
And he was okay with that. He was, because again, like, you can't try and look too far into the future. You could hire someone who promises you that they'll be with the company for 20 years, and life happens. So anyway, I went to this other company that paid me a lot more money and knew that knew that I needed some time flexibility and wanted me there enough that, that they knew
And
like,
that's nothing you would have ever put on your plan,
no, I would
right?
never have. It was like a gift from heaven dropped
Yeah.
down in my lap. And I even needed to be kind of, luckily I had my best friend who had worked at the company with me, and before she took an early retirement, she was right by my side saying like, because you know how you kind of get like Stockholm syndrome when you've been in a
Yeah.
bad situation for a long time, and like you'd have to go somewhere new and learn new systems and work with new people, and are you too old to make a big change like that? And it's
Change is
yeah,
scary.
right, and it's like the devil versus the great unknown. So luckily, this was someone who I already had a relationship with, who was like, come join me, this is a great company, and we believe in work-life balance, and we'll support you in the schedule that you need. And then I had my close friends saying like, you deserve this, you can do it, this
Right.
this is meant to be, like, you like, don't say no to this. And
And it's interesting, I mean, because what happens when you step into that, like that change that you are desiring, and don't worry about all the details of how it's going to unroll, is the things that happen you wouldn't have even been able to imagine,
right.
right? The possibilities, like you can imagine lots of things, but the possibilities that come down are usually much larger. I mean, when I decided to go back to school, when I left corporate, I actually became a massage therapist,
Mm, yeah.
and I went to school for 2 years. And just when I was enrolling in the school, my father-in-law called us because we were living outside of the city. My father-in-law called us and said, I found an apartment for you guys to move back into the city. And it was half a block away from the school.
Well, yeah.
So it was just like, okay, I guess this is what is supposed to
Right.
happen then, right? Like it
Mhm.
was just
Yeah.
too surreal to be believable.
Right. It's like you push the first domino and just let them roll.
And then so when you finished acupuncture, how
Mhm.
did you start working into the transitions? Like, was it just because of some losses that you had that you decided to go into like the grief transitioning, like grief, what do you
Um,
call it? Grief,
grief guide,
grief guide. That's it,
or just more broadly, grief work or grief support for people.
right?
Well, to be honest, I still feel like I am in a transitional phase where I am still working. Like my luckily I still have like a steady income through publishing that I can experiment with how I want my practice to be, and I don't have the pressure of, I need to see, you know 25 patients this week to break even or to pay the bills. Or so I got started, I guess like a year and a half or 2 years before the pandemic hit. And then the pandemic hit, and in New York, at least, we weren't allowed to like see people face to face for a time.
Yeah.
Very difficult. Um, and the wellness center I was at kind of went into hibernation for about more than 6 months. Um, so and then at the same time during the pandemic, I lost both my parents,
Oh,
not from COVID, but from different things related to old age. But COVID made it much more difficult,
yes.
and for all the challenges of being kept apart, and just yeah, in many ways not being able to have proper funerals. And so so luckily I didn't have to worry about seeing patients and running a busy practice, where I just kind of went into uh, went into my cocoon to even like be the caterpillar. Like, you know what? I'm gonna give myself the grace to let myself kind of dissolve into the muck of
Right.
caterpillar and not worry about turning into the butterfly yet. I need to I want to help people, and I felt bad during the pandemic that like I couldn't think of a good way to help people, but it just looking at myself with self compassion, it's like, you know what, tend to your family, tend to yourself, and don't worry about being Mother Teresa too.
Well, and I mean, one of the things about this, my whole philosophy of life is if you don't take care of yourself and take that time for yourself, you can't really properly help other people, right?
Right.
Like we have this desire inside us to do as much as we can and help, but if you're not in a good place,
Hmm.
you, yeah,
Yeah.
you're not bringing your A game.
Right.
Sports
And
metaphors.
yeah, one of the things that so I'm a Pisces, and I'm a water moon as well. I'm very watery and emotional. Um, so it actually part of what led me to the grief work is I really leaned into it and just and luckily with like my publishing work, I was able to work from home, so I didn't have to worry about like having to rush to the bathroom for like when I needed to like cry things out. It was all
Right.
all had like my own little private space where I could just be with my grief and help my various family members in the ways that I could. And it was an experience that was, I want to say like a rite of passage or a trial by fire. And I think, like, so one of my missions now is there's so little conversation around grief. People just want to run the other way from it or look the other way. And I'm at the place in my own journey where I've been through it and I'm still going through it, but I feel because I gave myself time, I feel grounded and steadier. And I'm not afraid of, being with people as they cry and weep and talk about their loss without trying to fix it or trying to, just put a happy face on it. I think there's so much healing in just people who will give you their full presence to just let you be with whatever's going on and know that, like I do grief sessions where, I'll tell, like, if people start crying, I'll let them cry it out. And, at the right moment, I'll just try and say something like, I'm here with you. You're not going to get lost in this emotion. You're not going to, you know, um, this isn't going to, swallow you whole. I'm
Right.
here. Just let it out. It's safe to let it out because I'm here. And, after whatever release needs to happen, then I can show them some breathing techniques or some qigong exercises or the things I've learned from a Chinese medicine perspective, from an energy medicine perspective, to just kind of come back to yourself, to the center of yourself, where you can breathe again, rather than it takes so much energy to repress your feelings
Yeah.
that it feels like people don't necessarily realize how good, they're scared of losing control, but it can feel so good if you,
Afterwards.
right, and not even like like, some people aren't criers, so it's not like you even have to cry, but if you just like, vent some of the, the emotions that people don't necessarily associate with grief or maybe are uncomfortable telling their friends and family about. But, grief comes with a lot of resentment, a lot of guilt, a lot of shame, a lot of anger. Um, so being able to kind of let that out of your head and just let it get some air on it, some fresh air on it, can help to kind of unclench and eventually feel ready to take a forward step, because you're not just like huddled trying to keep uncomfortable feelings at bay.
Well, and we have spent so much time curating our lives
Mm-hmm.
for, I mean, I don't entirely blame social media, but because even I think of the June Cleavers, like
Mm. Yeah.
your outward appearance, like it's not acceptable to show most emotions right
Right.
now. And then what if it's not acceptable, then it gets translated into maybe it's not right to feel them, and then what do you do with them, and where do you stick them, and it
Right.
is, and if you've never been had the time or the space to experience them and know that there is another side to it, like you do come out the other side, you don't stay there forever,
Right.
it can be scary and you can feel like you don't know what to do. So
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important that people are allowed that space to feel whatever it is they feel, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Because there is a whole, I talked to a grief coach last year who was talking about, we talked about the stages of grief, and she said something along the lines of, oh, it's way more complicated than that.
Yeah.
So,
That's yeah, that's like a myth that doesn't help things. Because actually, the book that's the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross um, wrote the stages of grief about people who were dying, not
right.
people who were grieving a loss. So it's a misconception at the very root that just
Yeah.
kind of become like a meme or something. Yeah, and then people feel guilty that they're not doing it right. It's like
Yeah, I know.
the
So you
right
got
way
the
to
extra
grieve.
grief.
Right. Right. Yeah, there's so many misconceptions. And I'm sure as a massage therapist, you were aware of how much you know, you find a muscle knot, and if you work into it, sometimes people get emotional releases from that because the emotions, if they don't move, they end up in a stomach knot affecting your digestion, or they end up in your shoulders giving you chronic headache. I mean, people don't realize how, like, grief actually is very physical. It's
Yes.
not just emotional. And especially if you're uncomfortable handling it on an emotional level, it will really become physical. And just they're finally doing some more studies on the physical aspect. They're starting to do functional magnetic resonance imaging of the brain, and they found that people in like the acute stage of grief, their brain actually looks like similar to someone who's had a traumatic brain injury.
Wow.
You can actually see it in some of the brain scans, because what happens is, for someone, again, it differs for different people, but assume you lost someone very close to you, like a parent or a spouse or even a pet, someone who is tightly bound into your conception of the world and yourself. um, your brain has mapped the world with this person front and center. So when they're no longer around, your brain has to use a lot of energy trying to remap all the neural pathways to make sense of things without this person who was like woven into everything. If you think about, like, you start your day, first thing you do is you kiss your spouse, you make them coffee, like, there's so many things you do even subconsciously throughout the day that are bound up with a particular person, or even like a particular place. If you leave a job or move a home, that's, you can have some grief over losses like that as well. But it's particularly dramatic when it's someone who's very tightly woven into your identity. So for months and months and even beyond, your brain is drawing, like, so much of your energy is just going into your brain reconfiguring things and trying to make sense of the world in a new way. So brain fog is very common. Memory issues, sleeplessness, or extra fatigue. And so it's really cruel for your average employer will give maybe 5 days off,
Maybe.
and and then, like, everyone expects you to be back to normal after like a month or so. And that's where, like, people really, you take so much energy to like fake it too, and
Yeah.
people worry that is it always going to be this way. So that's what I, as a, like, we talked earlier about how grief educator is an awkward title, but it's where, like, I do see there is a role for, like, to educate society about grief.
Mm-hmm.
um you know yeah, now I kind of try and always assume when I meet someone that I don't know what they're going through. And if someone's cutting you off in traffic, or someone's giving you bad service, or someone's doing whatever, it's, yeah, it's easy to be impatient or think, they're a jerk, but probably odds are they're wrestling with something that,
Yeah, there's something going on,
yeah.
even if it's not necessarily like traditionally what we would think of as grief, but
Mhm.
something has caused that person to lose kind of a, it's like they have blinders on sometimes, I
Mhm.
think.
Right.
And I guess like something that you do, because you can't do acupuncture virtually, can you? So,
No,
not quite yet.
not quite yet. I can't send the needle through the air, but I teach acupressure.
Oh, yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
But you also have a self paced digital course to help people.
Yeah, and that's something that it'll, for people who buy it, they'll have lifetime access because it's
Oh,
something I
nice.
intend to keep adding to. As I learn more, I'll be adding new tips and techniques. So basically, the idea is, there's so little grief support out there, and what people don't realize too is, you want to, for one thing, the person that you always leaned on may be the person who died. So you're completely adrift that way. Or, if, say, like your parent has died, in a perfect world, all the siblings would help each other and lean on each other. But unfortunately, everyone grieves in their own way. And this is partly why, like for couples who lose a child, there's a high rate of divorce because people grieve in different ways, and you want to want to demand support from someone who doesn't have the emotional bandwidth because they're going through it as well.
Right.
So for the first resources that you'd be inclined to lean to, often, and friends, if someone hasn't lost someone important to them, it's very hard for them to understand what it's really like and the depth of experience. And then, if you try to find a grief therapist, unfortunately, in like your average therapy program, there's very little education on grief, maybe a few hours and not much specific training. So it can be hard to find a therapist who's like more grief informed or trauma informed, or there are all sorts of like obstacles to getting insurance coverage, the backlog of like the wait time to get into a therapist. And the other thing I found is that therapy can be great, but it's usually just talk only. And
Right.
as we talked about, so much of this is experienced bodily. So I've found that if sometimes you just don't want to talk about your sadness. But if you do breathing techniques, if you do stretching techniques, acupressure, qigong, there are a range of different small steps that can lead you in a good direction, and can just help so much of the grief experience. It can be very similar to burnout because, particularly like if you've been in a caretaker role, there's something called anticipatory grief, where, if someone's on the downward decline, you start grieving long before they've actually physically died, especially if there's like dementia involved, or uh,
Right.
something where it's, they're losing function bit by bit, and it's very draining. So your nervous system is just constantly on high alert. So I like to teach simple techniques that can help really calm the nervous system and get you out of fight or flight, because that way your body's natural intelligence can kick in to healing on a deeper level and feeling safe in your body to feel your feelings and be able to, take a step forward, knowing that, grief isn't fixable, but you can learn how to carry it in a way that you can move forward, um, in an easier way. So the course is self-paced with just very bite-sized videos, because the other thing about grief is that, as I said, your brain is so fried that you don't have a big attention span. So
Right.
most of the videos are just, like a minute long, 5 minutes long, no more than like 15 minutes. There'll be like a longer 15, 20-minute kind of yoga flow routine for when you feel up to something like that. But otherwise, they're really quick so that, if you don't have a lot of time, or if you just need to duck away for a minute to kind of catch your breath, there's a simple technique that will kind of amp up, rather than just take a deep breath. There are some other tools that you can use that will help reset your nervous system so that it's easier to go back with your poker face on.
Right.
And the other idea behind it too is that sometimes it's 3 a.m. and grief hits at very it's a wild animal that can't be controlled.
I
So
called it emotional incontinence when I
yeah,
was.
that's a perfect way to look at it. Yes, it's not something that can be easily controlled. So it may be 3 a.m. and you can't call your therapist at 3 a.m. You
No.
can call your best friend at 3 a.m. But you could go watch a video to kind of like, okay, let me listen to this calm person's voice to kind of walk me through. Because the other thing is, like I've worked with other acupuncturists who know some of the things that I'm teaching, but you forget when you're in the thick of grief. You forget basic self-care because it's just like such a disorienting experience. So
There's just so many things that are
right,
overwhelming, right?
right. So
Yeah.
just someone to like lead you through simple things that can bit by bit restore you at your own pace, in your own time.
That's so good. That's so good. Amazing. And yeah, I mean, there's many life transitions. We have ended up talking a lot about grief,
Mhm.
but that's okay because that's a pretty big one that people
Yeah,
have to work their way through. I didn't know that about the way the brain has to rewire, but it makes complete sense. It makes complete sense.
yeah. And I
And
think yeah, and it's like I think every transition carries some grief within it.
right,
Because
true.
even if, like, even though the company I was at for 18 years, even though it was stressful and a big part of me was ready to leave, I still had such friendships there and such safety. It was like my home away from home for 18 years. So, the, you know, I think it's helpful to recognize the the beauty of new beginnings, but also like honor the grief in when things end or transition. So
So true. Oh my gosh. Yeah. That's awesome. Um, it's funny because I was about to ask you first. First, I was going to say, where can people reach you? It's, what's the name of your website again?
joyalchemyhealing.com.
Right. And that's in the show notes, everybody. Don't worry if you didn't catch it. Check the show notes. Everything's always there. And how to get a hold of that self paced course if you want to check it
Mhm.
out. And I was going to say, you just had such an awesome little thought right there because I always ask for final words of wisdom. I was like, ah, but do
Oh,
you have another final word of
um,
wisdom for people?
well, I would just say, um, like, emotions aren't a bad thing. Emotions are human, and they're information. And even like physical symptoms are information. It's your body trying to help you. So I just preach, there's so much power in gentleness and treating yourself with true kindness and letting emotions be what they are, because if you let them be what they are, they transform naturally on their own without with that like with big there's big magic if
Big
you
magic.
if you trust in the big magic of transformation rather than trying to resist and put up a wall. So many possibilities open up to you.
That's outstanding. Thank you so much, Annie, for coming and sharing all of this with us. I appreciate that so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this
Thank
conversation.
you.
It's been wonderful talking with you.
You too. And for my friends out in podcast land, Yes, check out Annie's website. If you're struggling with something, definitely reach out because sometimes you just need a little help. You know, I'm all about surrounding yourself with the right people. So definitely reach out to Annie. Take care of yourselves, and we will see you again soon. Take care, friends. Hi, my friend. Thanks so much for listening to this entire podcast. If you found it useful and you're like me and you like helping others, please feel free to share this. Just give it a like, give it a comment. If you found something useful in it, there's a chance that someone else will find something useful as well. Also, if you have any questions at all, I can absolutely help and I would love to help. You can email me at heather@prosperityflowcoaching.com. If you want more of this awesome content, you can follow me on Instagram, Heather Stewart Coaching. You can follow me on Facebook, Prosperity Flow Coaching. And I have a personal request. I want to help as many people as I can with these podcasts. And if you could give me a review, hopefully a good one, if you could share, if you could send this out into the world, I would truly appreciate it. I hope you have an amazing day, and I hope that you find your way to wellness by getting back to me. Take care, my friend.